Welcome back to the Zelda Game Club for the Ocarina of Time, and this is part 3. The Zelda Game Club is where we play through the Zelda series together as a community, and we've hit the middle part of Ocarina of Time. When the last part we transformed from Child Link into Adult Link, and learn that Ganondorf have been using us the whole time to gain access to the Sacred Realm, steal the Triforce, and now he's turned Hyrule into a land of monsters. Well, today we are going to be going through the first few temples as Adult Link, the Forest Temple and the Fire Temple, as well as exploring the Ice Cavern. If you want to get involved, then please do play along. We're going to be playing next part until we reach the entrance to the Spirit Temple, and once you hit that point, stop and comment on this video your thoughts of the game so far. Without further delay, let's dive back into the Ocarina of Time for part 3. So as Adult Link, Link steps out of the Temple of Time for the first time to see Hyrule transformed. Castle Town is in ruins and re-deads the awful screaming enemies there all over the place. However, Hyrule Field is slightly more calm than it used to be, and we want to make our way towards Lon Lon Ranch. Talon has been kicked out of Lon Lon Ranch and Ingo has taken over. And at this point we can get Epona by challenging Ingo to a race. We've got to beat him a couple of times, it can be challenging, because the race is 50 rupees each, so you do want to make sure you don't waste your chance to beat him. But the best thing to do is stick on the inside track, look for opportunities to overtake, and then race to victory. And once we've beaten Ingo, we can then jump over the fence with Epona to freedom. Well, now we have Epona, we can get around Hyrule much quicker, and our next job is getting the hook shot before we go to the Forest Temple. Well, before we get into the Forest Temple, I want to have a look at some developer notes, and this is all about horseback. So, IG Aonuma and dungeon designer IG Onizuka both said the reason they included the horse Epona is because Shigeru Miyamoto simply liked horses and wanted to include one in the game that Link could ride. There weren't any other games where the player could ride a horse. Since Miyamoto wanted this game to be unique, he decided it would be a good idea to incorporate it into the game. Originally, he speculated if he should just use the Pegasus shoes from A Link to the Past as a form of transportation, though came to the conclusion that riding on something you could interact with would definitely be more fun. According to Shigeru Miyamoto, he would go to riding clubs when he wasn't working. They would give him photographs of horses so he could reflect on those designs in the game. He knew, however, that creating a horse would be a huge challenge for the developers. Though Yoshiaki Koizumi presented an experiment that he created, and it became clear they would be able to do it. One obstacle they ran into was that at Hyrule Field there were too many trees, and the player would often run into them while riding on top of the horse, so they started to remove them, and eventually it became what it is today. In the game, the player is able to call Epona using the Ocarina of Time to play Epona's song, and according to Shigeru Miyamoto, the player could originally use a reed pipe in the game, although because it was too much trouble, they eventually switched it to the Ocarina, and in the end, the reed pipe wasn't even included in the game. Okay, back to Ocarina of Time, so we want to make our way to Kakariko Village and find the graveyard at the back. There's a new grave here with flowers on it, meaning we can grab the grave and slide it back, revealing a secret passage. Make your way down into the passage and we're going to meet the ghost of Dampy himself. So we have to race Dampy, and at the end, he's going to give us the hook shot. Once we have the hook shot, we've got everything we need for the next dungeon, the iconic Forest Temple. So we have to go back to the Kokori Forest to make our way through the Lost Woods. We meet Mido once again. He refuses to let us past until we play Saria's song. And once we're past Mido and through the Lost Woods, we find the Sacred Forest Meadow, guarded by some pretty tough moblins. So make your way past them, then you can meet up with Sheik outside the Forest Temple, and Sheik is going to teach you a song. Well, let's go to our first community comment. We got Dusty Bees back, so hey Dusty. Dusty says, "The Forest Temple has always been to me the epitome of Zelda temples, even to this day. The atmosphere and the theme is excellent. The abandoned haunted fortress. Why is this structure out here and basically being overgrown by a huge overwhelming forest that is easy to get lost in? I remember as a kid getting so lost in this temple, missing small keys, not realising you can climb past the skulltulas. Now I whip through this temple." Well, thank you for that comment, Dusty Bees. Good to have you back. And yes, This is definitely iconic Zelda dungeon design. I absolutely love this dungeon, and it was so good to go back. Now, I haven't played this dungeon since I played it as a kid, and it was really, really good to go back. I definitely like that mechanic with the pose, and you're absolutely right, it's very, very easy to miss the small keys. Okay, let's dive into the Forest Temple. So the first thing we have to do is get our hookshot out and use this on the branch to get in the Forest Temple. And the Forest Temple is probably one of the most iconic temples, not only in Ocarina of Time, but the entire Zelda series altogether. It can be a little bit confusing, but a good thing to do is check the symbols above the doors. They do provide you with some clues as to the way forward. In the centre of the main room, we see a cutscene with 4 Poe sisters removing their flames and running off to the 4 corners of the dungeon. Then we have to go and get them back. You'd have to be careful in this dungeon because Stalfos are hiding in the rooms. Early on, we have to fight one, but later in the dungeon, we have to take on a couple at a time, and things can get tricky, especially if you haven't got the hang of the combat just yet. I really love the character to this dungeon. We start outside, then you go inside, we've got multiple floors to explore, plus the exterior to explore, and you can also climb up the vines as well. This isn't a short dungeon either. The training wheels have definitely come off Child Link dungeons, and we're fully into Ocarina of Time. Having to retrieve the flames from the Poe sisters is a very good mechanic, plus also the heart-pounding Stalfos fights. Well, the item in the dungeon is the fairy bow, which is a welcome upgrade to any of the weapons we've used so far. The sequence of shooting the arrows in the paintings and getting the Poe sisters to appear, that's really, really cool. And then we get to the boss. Well, Ganondorf appears on horseback, and we've got to fight a phantom version of Ganondorf. He rides out of the paintings at random. You've got to shoot an arrow into him. If you don't manage to stop him, then he'll shoot lightning at you when he lands on the floor, and that can kill you very, very quickly. But hit him a few times, Ganondorf will praise you, saying you've grown in skill, although it's going to take more than that to beat the real Ganondorf, which is much less than a veiled threat. So once we beat the final boss, we meet Saria once again, who's the Sage of the Forest, and we get another medallion to add to our collection. I've got another comment from Dusty Bees, and Dusty Bees says, so as we defeat Phantom Ganondorf, we hear him speak to us. He appears unfazed that we are back, and that we've defeated the first of his spawn. In fact, he says specifically that when we fight him, it won't be easy. He expects to fight us, almost as if he planned this too. We have to remember, earlier on in the game, Ganondorf was one step ahead of us, using us to get into the Temple of Time and into the Sacred Realm to steal the Triforce, so you can only really assume that Ganondorf is one step ahead of us again. Well, next up, let's go to some developer notes once again, and this one is all about challenges. So in 2D games, including pre-Ocarina Zelda titles, the distance of particular objects or enemies is clear to the player. Though in a 3D environment, such as one present in Ocarina of Time, this is not the case. The sense of perspective is lost to the player in many early 3D titles, and creating a system in which this wasn't the case was one of the hardest challenges that the Ocarina of Time team at Nintendo had to overcome. Another challenge was creating walls out of polygons according to dungeon designer Eiji Onozuka. According to him, Link had a variety of impressive maneuvers, but unfortunately, many of his moves would cause him to clip through walls, such as the hookshot, and according to Onozuka, the mappers of Ocarina of Time, of which there were 3, had the most trouble in the entire game, saying there would be occasions when they would actually cry. There were many times when the designers would change the basic moves of Link, which would cause the mappers to totally redo what they'd done in the maps to accommodate what the designers had altered. Obviously, really appreciate Nintendo for putting out an absolutely fantastic game, but to hear the mappers crying, well, that is a little bit much, but I guess these are different times today. Well, next up, we've got Death Mountain, so now we've conquered the Forest Temple, it's time to go back to Death Mountain and check in on our Goron friends. So we make our way inside Goron City, only to find it pretty much empty, apart from a Goron who's rolled up into a ball patrolling on one floor. So you've got to use a bomb to stop him, and he says his name is Link, and he's named after you. Plus, he's also the son of Darunia, and he goes on to tell us a story. Ganondorf woke a terrible dragon who's now living inside the Fire Temple, and all the Gorons they're going to be fed to the dragon one by one as punishment. So once Link the Goron has finished talking to you, he gifts you the Goron Tunic, which allows you to go inside Death Mountain Crater and not get burned to death by the intense heat. So after this sequence, we go up to that Death Mountain Crater via the secret passage, and inside the crater we meet up with Sheik once again, and they teach us the song to get inside the Fire Temple. Okay, next up we got a community comment from Dusty Bees, and Dusty says, when we get to Death Mountain there's only 2 Gorons to be found, Medigoron and Link the son of Darunia rolling around. When we stop his rolling, he tells us of the resurrection of Volvagia by Ganondorf himself. An ancient dragon that supposedly ate Gorons, and it was defeated in the past by a Goron wielding the Megaton Hammer. I keep trying to find a way to convince myself that in the past perhaps Volvagia was in fact the Goron guardian deity, but other than Valoo in Wind Waker, I can't seem to find the basis for it. We're also told that all the Gorons were gathered up to be fed by Volvagia for standing against Ganondorf, and notice how they haven't yet been. Is Ganon holding them just to lure Link in. Well, next up we got the Fire Temple. So this one is another iconic temple, and this one with a new mechanic where we've got to free the Goron prisoners. So when we first arrive, we meet Darunia, and he comments on how much Link has grown. Well, we got some fantastic puzzles in this dungeon, plus a very nice top-down section where we've got to explore a maze with big rolling balls threatening to flatten us around every corner. We've got timed puzzles where we've got to hit a switch and get into another part of the dungeon, often climbing up before the flames reignite. Plus, also freeing the Goron prisoners. That is a really, really good mechanic. We've got another comment from Dusty Bees, and Dusty says, the Fire Temple is again super iconic, freeing the captured Gorons. And I've heard the theory that this once was a place to keep prisoners of war with all the cells. But as for the music, even though it was religious in nature, I far prefer the Islamic chants of the 1.0 version of the game. Sadly, all subsequent releases have had all the music changed. I get why, but I still love the original. Well, the main item in the dungeon is the hammer that allows us to pound items into the floor, manipulating the environment and changing it, allowing Link to discover new parts he couldn't get to before. So getting the hammer itself is an epic scene where you've got to run up a thin walkway before a timer runs out, and it is really, really good fun. The boss battle is against a dragon where we have to play a flaming game of whack-a-mole with the dragon coming out of random lava-filled holes, and then you've got to damage the dragon and whack it with a hammer. Beat the dragon. We see Darunia once again. This time he's returned as the Sage of Fire. Well, Dusty Bees returns, and he says a couple of things. You can 100% the Fire Temple without the Fairy Bow. It's also totally possible to beat the Fire Temple without ever switching to the Fire Tunic. Most people throw on the tunic and never take it off through the entire temple, although there are many rooms that are not scalding hot. These rooms are where the timer isn't displayed. Well, thank you, Dusty Bees. I did not know that. I'm one of those many players who threw on the Goron Tunic and never took it off. Well, once we're done with the Fire Temple, it's back to Zora's Domain to check out our underwater buddies. However, there's a problem because the whole of Zora's Domain is covered with ice and the Zora are trapped below. So we've got to go through the Ice Cavern, which is a mini dungeon, to help free the king. So we need to make our way back to where we meet Jabu Jab and then jump over the ice platforms to get into the Ice Cavern. We've got another comment from Dusty Bees, and Dusty said, when we return to Zora's Domain, we find ice everywhere. Everything is frozen over. We see King Zora behind red ice. Beyond the fountain, Lord Jabu Jabu is nowhere to be seen. Though we can jump from iceberg to reach a ledge that has actually always been there. Well, let's move on to the Ice Cavern. So this one is a much smaller dungeon. Plus, it's quicker too, and mainly filled with puzzles rather than combat. It's a good idea to come into this place with at least 2 bottles, as the new mechanic introduced here is the blue fire, which we need to trap inside a bottle to help melt the red ice. The red ice is contained within the ice cavern, but it's also trapped the King Zora too, so you want to save some when you leave and make sure you take it straight to the king. And Dusty Bee says, the ice cavern has always been too short for me. I love the thoughts and the concepts, and here we get the iron boots, and also the blue fire to free King Zora, who tells Naruto going to go and find out what's wrong in the water temple. That's a really good point there, Dusty Bees. I forgot to mention the iron boots, one of my favourite items in all of Zelda games. It's a real shame to see they haven't been used in the more recent games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So once you complete the puzzles with the ice cavern, you can melt the red ice around the king, and it'll give you the Zora tunic. And that means we are ready for the water temple, one of the most notorious temples in Ocarina of Time. Also, one we're going to tackle in the next part of the Zelda Game Club. Well, next up, I've got some more developer notes, and this time I want to talk about characters. Yoshiki Haruhana was the character designer in Ocarina of Time. The various characters in the game caused a lot of problems. In all, there were 60 in the game, which at the time was quite a lot. Each character, according to him, took around 2 to 3 days to create, and that was the minor characters rather than the most prominent ones, such as Link, Ganondorf and Zelda. Character designer Satoru Tazizawa wanted to make the characters feel real to the player. He wanted to design them with realistic and interesting animations, and give them unique emotions. Link is obviously the main character in the game. Both adult and child versions of Link were programmed with identical animations. According to Yoshiaki Koizuma, the team involved with programming movements to the Uzumasa studio in Japan to observe the sword battles and how to make certain actions look. Program director Toshio Iwawaki has stated that Link has around 1,000 different animation combinations. So we've got another comment from Dusty Bees, and Dusty says, I've got another theory. I will start here and finish in the next part. The theory is that Jabu Jabu passed away in the 7 years due to sickness caused by Baron Aid. And what do we actually know? That the Zora's fountain is a source of water that flows down Zora's River into Hyrule Field. It acts as a moat for the castle town and flows into Gerudo Valley and also finally Lake Hylia. Well, thank you, Dusty Bees. Really looking forward to the next part of your story there. But that is it for part 3 of the Zelda Game Club for Ocarina of Time. We're going to be continuing with part 4 in the next week or so, so make sure you play up until you reach the Spirit Temple. Then you want to stop and comment on this video. Now, part 4 is going to be the Water Temple and the Shadow Temple, and then we gear up for the final part with the Spirit Temple and the final battle in Ganon's Castle in part 5. Well, thank you everybody for playing along so far. That has been part 3 of the Ocarina of Time Zelda Game Club. If you enjoyed this, let me know down in the comments. Also, don't forget to subscribe, and a like down below would be really appreciated as well. That is it for part 3, but we're going to be back for part 4 in the next week or so. So thanks again, and I will see you very soon.